potentially when it's close by or they detect it. So we did a whole variety of these studies, basically flying sea bass and other things like ROVs and AUVs in front of these cameras as well. This is a picture, and this is from the camera pod, right? So these are these cameras here. They're stereo cameras, black and white, and these are about 200 feet apart. So there's a lane that you can go down. So here's the sea bass going by, and that's a scamp right there. So Sarah is in the process of analyzing a lot of this imagery from all this. So far, I think the results generally are very similar to Sarah's original results, that things like, the snappers and groupers, really, the camera's gone by so quickly that they sort of look at it and say, what the hell is that? And then, it's gone. Right? So interestingly and importantly, we've been able to get a new grant, which is a substantial grant for the next 3 years from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is money from the settlement of BP, where we're going to not only do more of this mapping with sea bass, but also combine that with multi-beam mapping to extend our multi-beam maps from those 3 small areas to a very substantial part of the West Florida shelf. The next and the third of these sort of fish studies is something totally different, and that is an NSF grant we call Novel Approaches to Understanding Human Use Patterns and Mobility for Natural Resources. And this is a partnership between Jim Sanchirko, who's an economist at Cal Davis, Andy Strelchek, who's a division chief over at NIMS in the Southeast region, and my student, Marcy Cockrell, who's a PhD student. So back in my former life, I had done some studies like this in New England, looking at the entropy of people, and that is, how predictable is their behavior. And when you think about it, that's really important. Say, for example, if you put a marine protected area out, what happens to those people? Are these people sort of randomly sharing information? Do they go back to the same location? I know, as a fisherman myself, if I catch something, I'm there forever until I don't catch things, right? So this is basically a typical fishing trip in New England. This is Cape Cod here, and so this was sampled on a scientific observer. So these are every time a fisherman put the trawl down. So this is the species composition. So these are marine protected areas, and you can see they went out. They actually fished in the marine protected area, interestingly, and then back out this way. So one of the things that we're able to do in the New England study was to use VMS, which is a vessel monitoring system, basically satellite tracking, that was on these vessels, and you can see some really interesting spatial patterns of the distribution of fishing around those marine protected areas. We've also gotten access to the same kind of information for reef fish fishing vessels on the west, in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we have about 10 million satellite position records for the fleet that's doing reef fish fishing. And this is a small slice of data, 65,000 records out of the 10 million. And so these are the 3 areas that we had worked on before, in terms of where we've done. And you can see that the important thing is the patterning of the more warm colors is where these fishermen are primarily fishing. So this is really important, not only because we're going to try to do these entropy calculations to see how habitual people are, but also when the other project I've got in terms of mapping habitats, we want to map the habitats where fishermen fish, because that's likely the high relief habitats. So we can see that a lot of these fishermen are fishing in this area right shoreward of the middle grounds. This whole area up in here is clearly a heavy fishing area. There's a lot of fishing that goes on in the Florida middle grounds, which, heck of a marine protected area. And then obviously, importantly, there's very little fishing going on in this one that's fully protected. So this is going to be really helpful to us in terms of determining which areas that we want to do high resolution mapping in. So, and there's a lot of potential to do the kinds of behavioral analyses that we want to do with those data. So the last thing I wanted to mention, and I'll get out of here, is a couple of public service things. For the last year and a half, I've been chairing a performance review of something called the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission, or NEAF. NEAF is a multinational what we call RFMO, or Regional Fishery Management Organization. And its area of operation is in the orange here. You can see it's a very substantial area outside the national jurisdictions of these countries, but primarily Norway, Iceland, Russia, the EU, Greenland, and Denmark acting for Greenland, etc. And this whole notion of there's about 10 or 11 of these RFMOs in the world. Bill used to chair one of them, which is called ICAT, which is the International Commission for Catching All the Tunas, or whatever it was. They asked 3 people who weren't, nationals of member countries to come in and do this. And I just want to kind of mention this. They had a bunch of criteria to look at the performance of these RFMOs, to look at the convention itself, to look at its conservation and management performance, to look at its compliance and enforcement, to look at its decision making and dispute resolution, to look at how it cooperates internationally in financial and administrative things. Long story short, this is the sort of stoplight thing. All these criteria we had. The interesting thing about this commission is it's the all-stars of fishing. I mean, these are highly developed countries. There's no developing countries here. These are probably the most sophisticated fish catching, enforcement. They have everything they need. And yet there's consistent failures for them to keep the catches under the scientific advice. They haven't really identified optimum capacity nor eliminated it, excess capacity. They can't make decisions because they're all at each other's, they're all lobbying for higher quotas. And so when you think about it, if an RFMO like this one can't actually, come to the point of view of staying within scientific limits, which one can? A lot of these are, RFMOs are based on very little data, et cetera. And so we came down fairly heavy on that. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get invited back to them. But, Last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of public service, and I'll get off Schwanman, is I'm a member of the Ocean Studies Board, and so we've been working on something called the Decadal Survey of Oceanography. And actually yesterday we completed our report. I can't tell you what's in the report, but it hasn't been released yet. It's really a cool group of people, and I, depending on which domain you're in, the point of this study was National Science Foundation's Oceans Group, makes a considerable annual investment of around almost $400 million a year in ocean sciences. And so over the next decade, the National Science Foundation asked us, what are the emerging fields that they should put their money in? And secondly, given some of their financial constraints right now, how should they balance their portfolio between the investments in individual investigator grants and the infrastructure that's required to do that? And this is the most compelling issue that they have, and that is, if you think about the investments that NSF Oceans makes, this is the total deflated. This is in 2014 dollars. So you can see it maxed out around 2004. It's been declining a bit, but if you look at the ratio between infrastructure, and that is the UNOLS fleet, IODP, which is the International Ocean Drilling Program, OOI, which is this new thing that's really just coming on board now, deep submergence, which is Alvin, and then small infrastructure. As a proportion of the total, that's growing, and individual science grants are declining. And so this puts a lot more pressure on lower success rates in proposals and all kinds of things, right? So the group is basically asked to, how can we get ourselves out of this dilemma of more and more expensive infrastructure, particularly when, the fleet, they're talking about building 3 new regional class vessels, retiring other vessels, et cetera. And so I can't actually tell you what we said about it, but nevertheless, it's been a really interesting, time. And one thing we do know is the 2015 budget is a 2% growth, which is basically an inflation-adjusted no-growth budget. And so what's going to happen if there's not going to be any major growth in NSF Ocean's budget as opposed to just tracking inflation? So it's an important aspect. So last couple of things. In March, there's going to be an episode of Journey to Planet Earth, which stars a few of my students, and Dave and Cheryl and a few others. So that should be kind of interesting. I understand Matt Damon is going to actually MC that thing. So hopefully they have the premiere here in St. Petersburg. I'm not sure. And then last, I'd like to congratulate my recent graduates, which are my first 4 graduates. Thanks.
Since Steve is our last speaker, I want to give him time for just one question before lunch.
Everybody's lonesome.
If nobody else is asking, what's the NASA budget look like in terms of that growth? Is it also projected to drop down? Or
Which NASA budget? I mean, I think the NASA budget had a very small increase in the science program, but then also they're very confused about where they're going next, and it's kind of a dog's breakfast, frankly, in terms of what NASA's going to do. But I think the science budget actually went up slightly.
Depending on which discipline.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Dean Dixon.
The report is actually released. Can you give a presentation to us on?
I'd be happy to. I think, in fact, I've got a conference call this afternoon. I'm going to talk about rollout of this thing. It's done. It's been reviewed by all the external reviewers, and I think we've got some fairly hard-hitting recommendations to get that balance back, which is, frankly, that's suicide, for young investigators in particular.
But also the topics of scientific emphasis.
It's really interesting. You saw the list, and I mean it's a pretty Catholic list in terms of the domains of ocean science. And one of the things that we didn't do was all lobby our own discipline, as much as we had these town halls at the last 2 ASLO meetings, and then also we had a virtual town hall, which got about 400 really thoughtful responses, and really thank the faculty here because they were disproportionately interested in, as opposed to other places like Scripps and Huey's. So people here did a very good job, and we listened a lot to what people had to say.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. So let's give all our